Ambassador pressed his forearms against the viewing window of station. The sight before him should have filled him with hope. Instead, fear crawled through his mind like poison. Hundreds of ships floated in the darkness of space. Each one represented the best his people could offer. The crystal ships of the caught starlight and threw it back in beautiful patterns. The living vessels of the collective pulsed with soft green lights. The metal ships of the mechanical accord moved with perfect precision. 3,000 years ago, ships just like these had failed. The harbingers had swept through the galaxy like a storm of death. Entire star systems had simply stopped existing. Billions had died before the ancient enemies finally went back to sleep in the galactic core. Now they were awake again. Tentacles curled with worry. The emergency council had been meeting for 3 days. Every species leader was here. Everyone had the same question. How do you fight something that can tear reality apart? The Republic wanted to build bigger shields. The suggested hiding in pocket dimensions. The talked about running to the outer edge of the galaxy. The mechanical accord calculated that they had a 12% chance of survival. None of it would work. Had read the historical records. The harbingers didn't just destroy ships or planets. They consumed the very fabric of space and time. They turned the laws of physics into suggestions. How do you fight an enemy that can simply decide you don't exist anymore? Sir, his aide spoke softly behind him. The council is ready to resume. Nodded and turned away from the window. The massive conference room buzzed with nervous energy. Representatives from 43 species sat around the circular table. Each had brought their best minds, their greatest warriors, their most advanced technology. And they were all afraid. The holographic display in the center showed the current situation. Red dots marked where harbinger forces had been detected. They were moving slowly but steadily outward from the galactic core. 12 star systems had already gone dark. No signals. No survivors, just empty space where civilizations used to exist. "We need a new approach," said Admiral Kex of the. Her crystalline body reflected the red warning lights. "Our ancestors fought them with conventional weapons and failed." "Perhaps we can negotiate," offered Speaker of the Peaceful Coalition. "These beings are ancient. They must have some form of intelligence." Several species made sounds of disagreement. You couldn't negotiate with a force of nature. The harbingers didn't want territory or resources. They wanted to consume everything. "Running is still an option," said the representative. "We could evacuate to the clouds, start over." "And abandon our homes," Admiral Kex's voice rang like breaking crystal. "Impossible." The argument continued for hours. The same suggestions, the same problems, the same fear. Found his mind wandering back to the window and the fleet beyond. So many ships, so much hope, all of it probably worthless against an enemy that had nearly destroyed the galaxy before. That's when the alarm started. Red lights flashed through the conference room. The holographic display changed to show the station's sensor readings. A new contact had appeared at the edge of the system. Single ship, unknown design. It was moving toward the station at a steady pace. "Identification," Admiral Kex demanded. The station's computer voice was calm and mechanical. "Unknown vessel broadcasting on old emergency frequencies. Message incoming." The voice that filled the room was unlike anything they had heard before. Rough and strange, speaking galactic standard with an odd accent. "This is the human ship Endurance requesting permission to dock. Sorry, we're running late. Had to stop for repairs after a run-in with some pirates." Silence filled the conference room. Felt his tentacles curl. Humans. He had heard rumors about them. A species from somewhere on the outer rim. There was classified as a death world. Most civilized species avoided contact with death world inhabitants. "Who authorized human participation?" Admiral Kex's voice was sharp with anger. "The emergency protocols," answered the station commander through the communication system. All spacefaring species were invited. The humans qualify. On the display, the human ship grew larger. It was crude compared to the elegant vessels in the fleet. Thick armor plating covered a basic hull design. Scorch marks and obvious repairs showed it had seen combat recently. It looked like something built to survive rather than to impress. "What do we know about them?" asked Speaker. Accessed his personal database. The information was limited but troubling. Humans came from a Class 12 death world called Terra. The gravity was crushing. The weather systems were violent. The native life forms were described as aggressively predatory. Most disturbing was their history. In less than 500 years since developing spaceflight, humans had fought 17 major wars. They seemed to view violence as a natural part of existence. Several species had noted their disturbing tendency to find combat solutions to diplomatic problems. "They're primitives," said Admiral Kex. "What could they possibly contribute to this crisis?" "Unknown," admitted the station commander, "but they're already here." Through the window, watched the human ship approach one of the docking bays. It moved with purpose, not the elegant grace of civilized vessels, but with the blunt efficiency of something built for function over form. "Should we allow them to participate?" asked Speaker. The vote was close. Many species worried about including Death World primitives in such an important meeting, but the emergency protocols were clear. Any spacefaring species could participate in a galactic crisis response. As they debated, couldn't shake a strange feeling. Everyone in this room represented the height of galactic civilization. They had spent thousands of years developing culture, art, and peaceful coexistence. They had created magnificent technologies and beautiful societies. And they were all terrified of an enemy their ancestors couldn't defeat. Maybe it was time for a different perspective. Maybe they needed someone who didn't think like a civilized being. Maybe they needed someone who came from a world where survival meant being more dangerous than everything trying to kill you. The docking bay confirmed successful connection. Somewhere on the station, the humans were preparing to join the most important meeting in galactic history. Had no idea that everything was about to change. The conference room doors opened with a soft hiss. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward the entrance. 3 figures walked into the room. They moved with a confidence that made several species shift nervously in their seats. These were the humans. The first was a woman with dark hair pulled back in a simple style. Scars crossed her face in patterns that spoke of violence survived. Her clothing was practical and plain. She wore no decorations or symbols of rank, but something about her made it clear she was in charge. Behind her came a man with gentle eyes but calloused hands. He carried a simple data pad and moved with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable with knowledge. His calm manner seemed at odds with the dangerous reputation of his species. The third was a woman whose left arm was clearly artificial. The mechanical limb moved smoothly, but the soft whir of motors was audible in the quiet room. She looked around the conference table with the eye of someone used to fixing broken things. Ambassador found himself staring. He had expected primitives, crude beings with simple tools and violent minds. Instead, these humans seemed almost ordinary, almost civilized. Then the woman with scars smiled, and tentacles curled with instinctive fear. It was the smile of something that knew how to hunt. "I'm Commander Sarah," she said, her voice carrying easily through the room. "This is Doctor, our science officer, and Chief Engineer Santos. We represent the Terran Federation." "You're late," said Admiral Kex coldly. "Sorry about that." Smile never wavered. "Pirates tried to board our ship 3 systems back. Took a while to convince them that was a bad idea." Several species exchanged glances. The way she said it made it sound like the pirates had been the ones in danger. Speaker cleared his throat nervously. "We welcome your participation, though we must admit surprise at your presence. Your species is relatively new to galactic affairs. New maybe, but not inexperienced. Doctor stepped forward, his gentle manner somehow more unsettling than his directness. We spent the journey here studying your historical records. These harbingers are interesting. Interesting? Admiral Kex's crystalline body flared with indignant light. They destroyed entire civilizations. They consumed star systems. They are the greatest threat the galaxy has ever known. They're definitely dangerous, agreed. But not invulnerable. Your records show patterns, weaknesses. Impossible. The mechanical accord representative spoke in precise, calculated tones. All analysis indicates harbinger capabilities exceed our defensive parameters by orders of magnitude. Santos laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. You're thinking too much like machines. Sometimes the answer isn't in the data. Accessed what little information they had about human psychology. Death world inhabitants were known to develop unusual problem-solving methods. Their harsh environments forced them to think in ways that civilized species found disturbing. "What do you propose?" he asked carefully. Move to the holographic display showing harbinger movements. She studied it for a moment, then did something that shocked everyone. She reached out and manipulated the controls with casual confidence, calling up detailed tactical information. "Your ancestors fought them like this was a normal war," she said. "Big fleets, advanced weapons, defensive positions, all very civilized and predictable." "It was the best strategy available," protested Admiral Kex. "It was the obvious strategy," corrected, "and it failed. You know what we do on death worlds when the obvious solution doesn't work." "What?" Speaker asked nervously. "We try the stupid solution, then the crazy solution, then the solution that makes everyone else sick to think about." Smile was sharp enough to cut steel. "We keep trying until something works." Doctor moved to join her at the display. His fingers danced over the controls with surprising skill. Harbingers consume matter and energy using a process similar to controlled reality distortion. They're adapted to resist energy weapons, kinetic impacts, and even exotic matter interactions. "Then how do we fight them?" demanded the representative. "We don't fight them on their terms," said simply. "We change the game." Santos had been examining the technical specifications of the assembled fleet. "Nice ships," she said. "Very advanced, very elegant, very predictable. The Harbingers have probably seen these designs 1,000 times." "Are you suggesting our technology is inadequate?" Admiral Kex was clearly offended. "I'm saying it's too good." Santos grinned and several species flinched. "You've spent centuries perfecting these designs, making them efficient and safe and civilized. You've forgotten how to build something that doesn't follow the rules." Was beginning to understand why Death World species made other races nervous. These humans looked at the greatest crisis in galactic history and saw it as a puzzle to be solved. They showed no fear, no respect for the magnitude of the threat. "What are you proposing?" he asked. Turned back to the assembled delegates. "We need to stop thinking like civilized beings and start thinking like survivors. The Harbingers expect certain responses to their attacks. They're adapted to counter advanced weapons and sophisticated tactics. So we give them something they've never seen before," continued. "Something crude and unpredictable, something that doesn't make sense by civilized standards." Santos was already sketching modifications on her data pad. "Half your ships are built too well, all safety systems and backup protocols. We need to strip out the safety systems, make them unstable, dangerous." "You want us to sabotage our own fleet?" Admiral Kex's voice rose to a crystalline shriek. "We want you to weaponize it," said calmly. "Turn your strengths into weapons. Make your ships as dangerous to pilot as they are to fight against." "That's insane," protested Speaker. "That's the point." His gentle smile was somehow more frightening than his predatory grin. Insanity is just another word for thinking outside accepted parameters. Death worlds teach you that sometimes the difference between survival and extinction is the willingness to try something everyone else thinks is impossible. The room erupted in arguments. Species representatives shouted over each other in dozens of languages. Some were outraged at the suggestion of modifying their precious ships. Others were intrigued despite themselves. Through it all, the three humans stood calmly in the center of the chaos. They had dropped their suggestions like stones into still water and were watching the ripples spread. Found himself studying their faces. There was something in their eyes that the other species lacked, a hardness that came from facing extinction regularly and finding ways to survive. These were beings who had learned that the universe didn't care about fairness or justice or honor. They were beings who had learned to care only about winning. "You're asking us to abandon everything that makes us civilized," he said quietly. Looked at him directly. Her eyes were the color of winter storms. "Ambassador, with respect, civilization is a luxury. Right now, you need to decide what's more important, staying civilized or staying alive." The arguments continued around them, but barely heard them. He was staring at these three humans and realizing that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy's salvation would come from its most uncivilized corner. The question was whether the civilized species would be brave enough to follow where death led. The engineering bay of station had been transformed into something that made most species nervous to enter. What had once been a pristine facility for routine ship maintenance now looked like a workshop run by. Chief Engineer Santos stood over a crystal ship, her mechanical arm spinning tools with inhuman precision. Sparks flew as she cut into the elegant hull design. Around her, horrified engineers watched their pride and joy being systematically destroyed. "You're removing the harmonic stabilizers," one of them wailed. "The crystal matrix will become unstable, dangerous." "That's the idea," Santos replied without looking up. Her welding torch carved through another support beam. "Your ships are too stable, too predictable. The Harbingers know exactly how crystal technology works because they've been fighting it for." She stepped back to examine her work. Where once a beautiful, symmetrical ship had floated, now there was something that looked half-built and entirely wrong. Exposed crystal formations jutted at odd angles. Power conduits ran outside the hull in seemingly random patterns. "It's ugly," whispered an engineer. "It's effective," Santos corrected. "Sometimes ugly is all that stands between you and dead." Across the bay, Doctor was having an equally disturbing conversation with the bioship designers. The peaceful species had created living vessels that worked in perfect harmony with their environment, wanted to make them sick. "I don't understand," said the chief engineer, her leaf-like skin pale with distress. "You want us to infect our ships with parasites." "Not parasites," explained patiently. "Symbiotic organisms designed to make your ships more aggressive. Right now, your bioships are adapted for peaceful exploration. They avoid conflict. They try to heal rather than harm." He gestured to the living ship floating in the adjacent dock. Its surface pulsed with gentle green light, beautiful and serene. "Against the Harbingers, that peaceful nature will get everyone killed. We need to make them angry." "Living ships can't be angry. They don't have emotions in the way you understand them." Smile was gentle and terrible. "They will when I'm done with them. Fear and rage are excellent motivators for survival. Your ships need to learn both." The modifications he proposed horrified the introducing aggressive microorganisms into their bioships' bloodstreams, installing pain receptors to make them more reactive to damage, teaching them to attack rather than flee. "This goes against everything we believe," protested the chief engineer. "Your beliefs are about to get you extinct," replied. "On Earth, we learned a long time ago that sometimes you have to become the monster to defeat the monster." Commander was having her own conversations with the fleet admirals. The meeting room buzzed with angry voices as she explained her tactical modifications. "You want us to remove our defensive systems." Admiral Kex's crystalline form flared with outrage. "Our shields and armor are the only things keeping our crews alive." "Your shields and armor are keeping your crews predictable," countered. "The Harbingers have fought shielded ships before. They know exactly how to counter every defensive system you have." She activated a holographic display showing her proposed battle formations. The alien admirals stared in horror. Instead of the elegant battle lines they were used to, tactics looked like organized chaos. "These formations make no sense," protested the Mechanical Accord Admiral. "You're putting ships in positions where they'll be vulnerable to friendly fire." "I'm putting ships in positions where the Harbingers won't know where to shoot," explained. "Your neat formations tell the enemy exactly where everyone is and what they're going to do next. My formations tell the enemy nothing." "Because they tell us nothing either," Admiral Kex pointed out. "How do we coordinate attacks if no one knows where anyone else is supposed to be?" Smile was sharp. "You learn to improvise. You adapt to changing conditions. You stop trying to control everything and start trying to survive everything." The Peaceful Coalition representative looked sick. "You're talking about deliberate chaos, controlled anarchy." "I'm talking about staying alive," replied. "Order is predictable, chaos is not. The Harbingers are adapted to fight order. Let's see how they handle chaos." While the engineers and admirals argued, found himself in the station's database center with Dr. The human was accessing historical records with disturbing intensity. "What are you looking for?" asked. "Patterns," replied, his fingers dancing across the interface. "The Harbingers aren't random forces of destruction. They're organisms. Complex, ancient, powerful organisms. And every organism has weaknesses." The data streams showed 3,000 years of Harbinger encounters, battle reports, sensor readings, survivor accounts, absorbed it all with the focus of a predator studying prey. "Look at this," he said, highlighting specific sections. "Harbinger consumption rates vary depending on the type of matter they encounter. They process pure energy efficiently. They handle refined materials well. But look what happens when they encounter biological waste products." Studied the data. There was a slight reduction in Harbinger efficiency when they consumed organic waste. The difference is minimal. "The difference is real," corrected. "On Deathworlds, you learn that minimal advantages can mean the difference between extinction and evolution." He pulled up another data stream. "And look at this. Harbinger reality distortion fields destabilize when exposed to contradictory mathematical principles. Your ancestors tried to counter them with logical, consistent physics. What if we hit them with physics that doesn't make sense?" "Impossible physics." "Physics designed by someone who learned to think outside physical laws," explained. "Deathworlds teach you that the rules are just suggestions. Sometimes survival means breaking the rules so badly that reality has to improvise." As the days passed, the modifications continued despite growing protests. Crystal ships became unstable weapons that could shatter unexpectedly, sending deadly fragments in all directions. Bioships developed aggressive personalities and began hunting behaviors. Mechanical Accord vessels had their logic systems infected with controlled chaos algorithms. The fleet that emerged from these modifications barely resembled the elegant armada that had originally gathered. Ships moved in unpredictable patterns. Weapons fired at inconsistent intervals. Hull designs violated basic engineering principles. It looked like a fleet built by. "The crews are terrified," Admiral Kex reported during one of the daily briefings. "Half of them refuse to board their modified ships." "Then we'll crew them with volunteers," replied. "People who understand that sometimes being terrified is better than being dead." Surprisingly, volunteers came forward. Young officers tired of traditional thinking, engineers curious about impossible modifications, soldiers who understood that desperate times called for desperate measures. Most surprising of all were the species representatives who began adopting human thinking patterns. The logical-mechanical accord started incorporating random elements into their strategies. The peaceful began talking about acceptable casualties. The elegant started building ugly, functional weapons. "You're changing them," observed to during one of their planning sessions. "We're showing them options they never considered," replied. "Civilization teaches you to think inside certain boundaries. Death worlds teach you that boundaries are just things to break when they get in your way. And if they can't adapt to this new way of thinking." Looked out at the modified fleet, a collection of ships that no sane engineer would have designed. Then they'll die civilized. But if they can adapt, if they can learn to think like death, then maybe the galaxy has a chance. The first test came sooner than expected. Long-range sensors detected Harbinger scouts entering the outer system. Small reality, but still dangerous enough to unmake entire planets. "This is it," announced to the assembled fleet. "Time to see if crazy beats invincible." Space around station twisted like a living thing in pain. Reality bent and warped as the main Harbinger force emerged from the galactic core. Massive entities the size of small moons drifted through the void, their presence making the laws of physics struggle to maintain consistency. On the bridge of the human ship Endurance, Commander watched the enemy approach through sensors that kept failing and restarting. The Harbingers didn't just travel through space. They consumed it, leaving areas of twisted nothingness where normal matter couldn't exist. "How many?" she asked her sensor operator. "Readings are inconsistent, Commander. The reality distortion is making our instruments give impossible results. Best estimate is 12 major entities, plus an unknown number of smaller scouts." Nodded grimly. 12 Harbinger cores, each one capable of unmaking an entire star system. The last time they had awakened, it took the combined might of a dozen galactic civilizations just to drive them back into dormancy. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "Execute Chaos Protocol." Across the system, the modified alien fleet began its impossible dance. Crystal ships moved in formations that violated their own design principles, their unstable hulls crackling with dangerous energy. Bioships, infected with aggressive organisms, prowled the void like predators seeking prey. Mechanical accord vessels followed attack patterns that their own computers insisted were mathematically impossible. It was everything Admiral Kex had feared. It was exactly what it hoped for. The first contact came when a Harbinger scout encountered a patrol group. The traditional response would have been coordinated weapons fire followed by strategic withdrawal if the shields failed. Instead, the modified ships did something unprecedented. They exploded on purpose. Not destroyed by enemy fire, but deliberately destabilized by their own crews. The crystal matrix that had once provided elegant structural integrity became a weapon of chaotic destruction. Shards of reality-cutting crystal spread through space in patterns that no computer could predict. The Harbinger Scout, adapted to counter organized weapons fire, found itself being shredded by debris that shouldn't have been able to harm it. Fragments of crystalline hull material cut through its reality distortion field like broken glass through soap bubbles. "First blood to the good guys," Santos reported from the engineering station. "The unstable crystal matrix is confusing their defensive systems." But the victory was costly. The patrol group was gone, their crews having sacrificed themselves to prove a point. On Death Worlds knew, sometimes victory required being willing to die in ways your enemy didn't expect. The main battle began when the largest Harbinger core entity reached the inner system. It was massive beyond comprehension, its presence causing stars to flicker and space itself to develop cracks. Reality storms swirled around it like weather patterns made of broken physics. The combined galactic fleet attacked using traditional formations and tactics. The results were predictably catastrophic. Harbinger consumption beams reduced entire battleships to their component atoms. Reality distortion waves made whole squadrons simply cease to exist. Within minutes, half the traditional fleet was gone. All ships execute protocol, commanded. What happened next would be talked about in galactic history for to come. The surviving alien ships abandoned 3,000 years of military doctrine and started fighting like humans. Bioships, their peaceful nature corrupted by aggressive organisms, began ramming attacks against entities that could dissolve matter with a thought. Instead of being consumed, their infected biological systems proved resistant to Harbinger consumption processes. The modified organisms in their bloodstreams created toxic reactions that the reality warpers couldn't process efficiently. Mechanical Accord ships, their logical systems infected with chaos algorithms, started behaving in ways that violated every principle of rational warfare. They fired weapons at random intervals, changed course without apparent reason, and implemented battle strategies that their own computers couldn't understand. The Harbingers, adapted to fighting organized resistance, found themselves facing something they had never encountered before: deliberate, weaponized insanity. "It's working," Doctor reported from his monitoring station. "The Harbingers' adaptive systems are struggling to counter tactics that don't follow any logical pattern." But the cost was enormous. For every small victory, entire ships were lost. Crews died as their modified vessels pushed beyond safe operational limits. The bioships were consuming themselves from the inside. The crystal ships were shattering under their own instability. Watch the battle through sensors that kept showing impossible readings. Space itself was becoming unreliable. Up and down had become suggestions. Cause and effect were operating in reverse. Ships were being destroyed before they were attacked. Other ships were surviving impacts that should have unmade them completely. It was exactly the kind of environment where Deathworld thinking thrived. "Santos," she called to her engineer, "how's our special surprise coming?" "Ready when you are, Commander, though I should mention that activating it will probably kill us all." Smiled the smile that had made dozens of alien species nervous. "Probably isn't definitely, and definitely beats letting the Harbingers eat the galaxy." The special surprise was something no civilized species would have considered. While the aliens had focused on building better weapons and stronger shields, the humans had focused on building better ways to die. The Endurance had been modified with systems that would turn the ship itself into a reality bomb. Instead of fighting the Harbingers' ability to distort physics, they were going to distort physics right back at them. Create a reality contradiction so severe that spacetime itself would have to choose which set of physical laws to follow. "Target the largest Harbinger core," ordered. "All remaining ships execute final protocol." What remained of the modified fleet formed up around the Endurance, not in any formation that military academies would recognize, but in a pattern that felt right to beings who had learned to trust instinct over logic. They charged directly into the heart of the reality storm. The Harbinger core entity was a thing of terrible beauty, its surface crackling with energies that shouldn't have been able to exist. It had already consumed 3 star systems and was working on a 4th. Its reality distortion field extended for millions of kilometers in all directions. The alien ships entered the distortion field and began to come apart, not from enemy fire, but from the simple inability of matter to exist in a place where the rules kept changing. Hulls twisted into impossible shapes. Engines imploded into mathematical paradoxes. Crews found themselves existing in several different timelines simultaneously. And somehow they kept fighting. "This is insane." Admiral Kex's voice crackled through communications that shouldn't have been able to work in the reality storm. "The laws of physics have completely broken down." "Welcome to Death World thinking," replied as her own ship began to experience temporal displacement. Physics is just another rule to break when it gets in your way. The Endurance reached the Harbinger core just as its hull started to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Could see versions of herself making the same decision in a dozen different realities. In some timelines, she hesitated. In others, she acted immediately. In this timeline, she activated the reality bomb. What happened next was impossible to describe using normal language. The ship didn't explode in any conventional sense. Instead, it became a contradiction that reality couldn't resolve. The Endurance existed and didn't exist simultaneously. It was destroyed and intact at the same time. It occupied the same space as the Harbinger core while also being millions of kilometers away. The Harbinger, adapted to manipulating reality, found itself facing something it couldn't process. A reality that refused to be manipulated because it couldn't decide which reality to be. The explosion, when it came, wasn't made of energy or matter. It was made of pure impossibility. A wave of contradictory physics spread outward from the impact point, unmaking everything it touched while simultaneously creating new versions of everything it unmade. When the chaos finally settled, the Harbinger core was gone. Not destroyed, not consumed, not transformed. Simply absent as if it had never existed at all. But so was the Endurance and everyone aboard her. Across the system, the surviving Harbinger entities began to retreat. For the first time in recorded history, they were withdrawing from a feeding ground. The reality bomb had created a zone of permanent paradox that even they couldn't enter safely. "Commander, do you copy?" Admiral Kex's voice echoed through empty space. There was no response. There would never be a response. But somehow, impossibly, the galaxy was still there. 1 month after the Battle of System, Ambassador stood in what had once been the station's memorial garden. The space had been expanded to accommodate the thousands of new names carved into crystal walls. Most were alien names from dozens of species. But in the center, on a simple black stone that somehow seemed more significant than all the elegant monuments around it, 3 human names were etched in basic script. Sarah Santos. The garden was different now. Where once it had contained carefully cultivated plants from peaceful worlds, now it held a mixture of life forms that shouldn't have been able to coexist. Earth roses grew beside flowering vines. Crystal flowers chimed softly next to memory moss. Like everything else since the humans had arrived, it worked despite making no sense. "They still terrify me," Admiral Kex said softly, joining at the memorial. Her crystalline form had been repaired after the battle, but the hairline fractures remained visible. Battle scars, the humans would have called them. Even dead, they terrify me. Nodded, he understood. The humans had saved the galaxy, but they had done it in ways that challenged everything the civilized species thought they knew about themselves. "The political situation is interesting," he said carefully. Interesting was an understatement. In the month since the battle, human space had transformed from a backwater region to the most sought-after territory in the galaxy. Trade delegations waited in line for months just to visit Earth. Military academies were offering massive payments for human instructors. Several species had formally requested to establish joint research facilities in Terran space. But the humans were being selective about their new relationships. They seemed more interested in species that had adapted well to thinking during the crisis. The who had embraced weaponized instability. The few who had chosen aggression over peace. The mechanical accord units that had learned to value chaos over logic. "They're changing us," Admiral Kex continued. "Not just politically, fundamentally, the way we think about problems, the way we approach challenges." She was right. Military academies across the galaxy were revising their curricula to include adaptive tactics and creative destruction theories. Engineering schools were teaching courses on beneficial instability and functional dysfunction. Even the peaceful coalition had established a new branch called Defensive Aggression Studies. The humans hadn't just saved the galaxy, they had infected it with their way of thinking. Doctor appeared at the edge of the garden, carrying a small potted plant. He moved quietly among the memorial stones, tending to the impossible garden that had somehow become a symbol of the new galactic order. Doctor called softly. The human looked up, his gentle eyes unchanged despite everything that had happened. He was the only human survivor from the delegation, having been aboard a research vessel when the Endurance made its final run. The weight of representing his entire species in galactic affairs rested on his shoulders, but he bore it with the same calm competence he had shown from the beginning. Ambassador, Admiral, he nodded to each of them, the memorial garden is growing well. Like everything the humans touch, Admiral Kex observed, it thrives in ways that shouldn't be possible. Smiled, the same gentle expression that had once seemed so unsettling to the civilized species. Now it was merely sad. Sarah always said that life finds a way to adapt, even in impossible situations. How do you bear it? Asked, knowing that your people's sacrifice saved us all but at such a cost. Was quiet for a long moment, his hands working automatically to care for a cluster of earth flowers that had somehow learned to process the artificial atmosphere of the station. On Earth, he said finally, we have a saying, the good of the many outweighs the good of the few. Sarah and understood that. They knew the math. 3 humans versus trillions of galactic citizens. It wasn't a difficult equation. But it was your friends, Admiral Kex said softly. Yes, his voice was steady, but could see the pain in his eyes. It was my friends, and they would be furious with me if I let their sacrifice become meaningless. He gestured to the garden around them, the impossible mixture of life forms that had learned to coexist through controlled chaos rather than careful planning. This is their legacy, not just the military victory, but this, the idea that different approaches to life can work together, that sometimes the best solution is the one that makes no sense to anyone else. A group of young officers from various species was touring the memorial, watched them study the simple black stone with its 3 human names. They would carry those names back to their home worlds, along with the stories of how 3 had changed the course of galactic history. The Harbinger threat may return, Admiral Kex said. Our scientists believe they're dormant again, not destroyed. Probably, agreed. But when they do return, they'll face a galaxy that thinks differently. Your species are learning to be unpredictable, to value adaptation over perfection, to understand that sometimes the uncivilized solution is the right solution. He picked up a handful of soil from one of the garden beds, earth soil, somehow thriving in alien environments. Sarah would have been pleased to see how quickly everyone adapted. She always said that Deathworlds don't just create tough individuals, they create tough ways of thinking. And you asked, what will you do now? Looked around the memorial garden one more time, then at the 2 alien representatives who had become unexpected friends. I'm going home. Earth has received thousands of applications from young aliens who want to study on our world. They want to learn how to think like. Isn't that dangerous? Admiral Kex asked. Death world conditions. We'll teach them what they need to know, finished. How to adapt, how to survive, how to find solutions that everyone else thinks are impossible. He paused at the memorial stone, placing his hand briefly on the carved names. Always said that the best memorial isn't a monument, it's making sure the lesson doesn't get lost. As walked away, and Admiral Kex remained in the garden. Around them, impossible plants thrived in conditions they shouldn't have been able to survive. New growth sprouting from careful destruction. Beauty emerging from controlled chaos. Do you think we've learned the right lessons? Admiral Kex asked. Considered the question while watching a group of engineers discussing modifications to their crystal technology. They were arguing about the best ways to make their designs more unstable, more dangerous, more effective. The conversation would have horrified their predecessors, but it made perfect sense now. "I think," he said carefully, "that we've learned human lessons. Whether they're the right lessons, time will tell." And if the harbingers return, looked at the simple black stone with its 3 human names. Then he looked at the impossible garden growing around it, proof that sometimes the most unlikely combinations produce the strongest results. If they return, they'll find a galaxy that learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes civilization isn't about following the rules. Sometimes it's about knowing which rules to break. In the distance, ships from dozens of species moved through space in patterns that military academies were still trying to understand. Formations that violated every principle of organized warfare, but somehow worked better than anything the galaxy had seen before. The humans were gone, but they had left behind something more valuable than any weapon or technology. They had left behind a new way of thinking about impossible problems. The galaxy would never be the same. For the first time in its history, that was exactly what it needed to be. And somewhere in the controlled chaos of adaptive tactics and creative destruction, the spirit of 3 lived on, making sure that, when the universe presented impossible challenges, there would always be someone ready to try impossible solutions. The memorial garden grew, thriving in ways that made no sense to anyone except those who had learned to think like humans. Beautiful, dangerous, alive. Just the way Sarah would have wanted it.